Some good news. Some good news. A federal judge has stopped the U.S. Air Force from taking any punitive action against members of the Air Force and the Space Force who are seeking religious exemptions for their COVID-19 shot mandate. Now, to date, the Air Force has systematically denied over 6,800 requests for religious accommodations. I've actually talked to a JAG in the Air Force who says that even though they're approved at the lower levels, they're just being uniformly put aside. They've only granted, out of that 6,800, 135 requests, all which were for members at the end of their careers. Oh, how nice. Or they were otherwise eligible for an administration exemption. Now, Air Force leaders have argued that the vaccinations are an important component of fitness and military readiness. Really? I think with each passing day that their case is getting weaker. I mean, you see all these people, including the president himself, who's, I don't know how many, he's had so many jabs, he looks like a pincushion, but yet he got COVID. Joining me now to discuss this is the attorney at law, Chris Wiest, who is one of the lawyers representing the Air Force service members in this case that has successfully gained an injunction against actions taken against these members. Chris, welcome to Washington Watch. And by the way, congratulations on this preliminary injunction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and this was the latest chapter. I think, back in March, we got a preliminary injunction for the initial 18 named plaintiffs, and then we sought class certification, which the judge granted and now has extended to basically the entire Air and Space Force, as well as the Air National Guard. And I think, you've hit it on the nose. There's been systemic denials of these exemptions for religious reasons, and there's been a value judgment by Air Force leaders that the religious reasons simply aren't as important as other reasons. And I think the discrimination is an important part of the case. And in fact, I would argue, it's central to the case and the claims that we brought under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. While the Air Force has denied thousands of religious exemptions, they have granted thousands of medical and administrative exemptions. And in fact, it's interesting, their documentation, for instance, suggests that there's no reason why pregnant women should not get the vaccine, and yet they routinely have granted medical exemptions for pregnant women. They've granted, medical exemptions for all kinds of reasons. They've granted administrative exemptions for the end of the service folks, and there's other administrative reasons why they've granted these exemptions as well. And so, they come into court arguing, oh my gosh, we need this, it's absolutely critical. And we say, well, okay, if that's true, why are you granting thousands of administrative and medical exemptions? And they never had a good answer for that. So, it is a religious discrimination case, and that's how we've litigated it.
And it's, and again, I mentioned this at the beginning. Obviously, I'm not going to give names or anything or where I'm talking to people, but in talking with an Air Force JAG officer who has been a part of processing these packages, what's so, I think, callous about this is that the service members, in good faith, go through the process. They go to the chaplain, they fill out all the paperwork, they do all of this, and it's almost as if when it gets to the higher command, they just drop it in the trash can, don't even read it, even though in good faith, they've gone through this process to make their claim for this religious exemption. And you're right, I think this is outright, blatant religious hostility.
It is. And, you say you think they do. We know they do. We have evidence, and we've got a whistleblower that says that there was a Air Force-wide meeting with the general officers that have been processing these back in, I believe, October of 2021 out at the U.S. Air Force Academy, the Corona Conference, not Corona like COVID, but it's an annual military leadership conference for the Air Force. And we have evidence that suggests there was a directive given that they simply would not approve these exemptions at that meeting for religious reasons. And it is hostility. And, if you look at the denial letters, they are form letters. There is no individualized consideration. The government, argues in court that there's individualized consideration, but, you can pierce through that by looking at the similarities in these letters and how they've been processed. And here's the interesting thing. We've had some of these plaintiffs go up and have their processes reviewed. And they're suggesting, well, there's no reason why we can't grant it now, but 5 years from now, he might be in a duty where he might need to deploy. And, they're denying them. And I would add one other piece of really interesting information. One of our plaintiffs, in addition to having religious beliefs, also became pregnant, and she doesn't mind us sharing her name.
So it
if I
is,
need to, but
it is a woman, right?
it is a woman.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, but that it's just women can get pregnant still. I just wanted to make sure.
I think that's right. I don't think,
Okay.
if you define as one, right? Yeah. So,
Okay.
so
All right.
I think she gets pregnant, and so they grant her a medical exemption and deny her a religious exemption. Well, there's no difference in her duty. There's no difference in her duties and what she's doing in any aspect of her performance. And yet it is clear there is a value judgment made on her pregnancy. We're going to grant you an exemption for that, but your religious beliefs, no way. I mean, that gets denied. And so, it is blatant religious discrimination. It is systemic, and it runs, frankly, all the way up to the Secretary of the Air Force. It may run up higher than that. And, we've proven a lot of that to date to get to where we are in this case.
Chris, I would have to imagine that the same thing is happening in other branches of service, because we see the same denials, and we see, the forcing out of these members of the different branches of the service. Are you getting a lot of knocks at your doors from other service members?
So we are, and there's a working group among, liberty-minded, religious-minded attorneys. There's a working group, with the folks at Liberty Counsel, with the folks at First Liberty down in Texas. First Liberty got a Navy-wide preliminary injunction class action also about 3 months ago. So the Navy's covered. Now the Air Force and Space Force is covered. The Liberty Counsel folks are in Florida right now trying to get a Marine Corps-wide class action. The federal judges have sort of suggested that because each branch processes these a little differently, even though they're all systemically denying them, that it would not be appropriate to grant a DoD-wide class. And so there's a working group of attorneys. We're on an email list, and, we're trying to work together to cover the entirety of the DoD.
Well, Chris, let me just say this in all sincerity. Thank God for attorneys like you and others that are defending the religious freedoms of those men and women who are defending our freedoms. We're grateful for you, and thanks for joining us today, Chris.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks, Tony.